So I'm here at the British Museum and I'm positively giddy. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but one of my life's dreams was actually to come here. I know it's kind of a weird thing to have as a dream, but my understanding is this is like literally the best museum on earth, just for everything. I mean, the Louvre is probably a better art museum, and I have been to the Louvre and it was amazing, but I'd imagine this is the best overall, just because Britain conquered so many places and they brought the stuff here after they conquered the places. Now, I don't begrudge them that, as I think ISIS has shown, this is probably the safest place for a lot of this stuff, given how many wars, revolutions, radical ideologies the Middle East goes through. I think if a lot of this stuff wasn't here, it would either be destroyed or sold on the black market. So that's fine with me, and we'll get to see the Rosetta Stone. So I'm just going to do a series of, I guess, vlogs covering my trip to the British Museum. You know me, I just lecture. I go into full-on lecture mode as I'm at a whim. So hopefully this will be educational for you. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. This was what I was the most excited to see of anything here. The Assyrian winged lions. Look at them, they're spectacular. Let me just put up my hand for reference. They're huge, and they are from 800 BC. So these are almost 3,000 years old, and they're in pretty much perfect condition. There's a little crack up there, but they are absolutely glorious. And you can see they have the cuneiform writing on them is completely intact. If I could read ancient, I guess Assyrian, then this would be completely legible. But no, it's spectacular. Now, they didn't speak Akkadian at this point in history, but they still use cuneiform. Interestingly, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which was ultra-reactionary, was kind of the first, one of the first groups of people in history to employ archaeology, because they viewed themselves as the direct heirs to Sargon of Akkad and the Akkadian Empire, and they were trying to kind of develop a closer ties to that history. So they dug up a lot of old Babylonian and Akkadian stuff, and they built temples on the spot of old temples. That was kind of one of the big things they did. And they also reformed the cuneiform to make it look more like ancient Acadia. I forget if it was Akkadian or Babylonian. There's kind of a lot of overlap between them. I believe Assyrian and Babylonian were basically the same language, and aside from Asher, they basically had the same gods. But oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, it's the statue of Ramses the Great. Oh wow. Actually, no, it's King Amhotep. My bad. It's not Ramses. It looks kind of like the Ramses statue, but it is spectacular. Oh, cool. We have a bunch of statues of Bast, I believe is her name, the cat goddess. Once again, these are in spectacular shape. Oh no, that's Sekhmet. Wow, I'm not at the top of my game today. Pretty sure there's a goddess named Bast. So this is 1,000, so this is 3,000 years old. Once again, it's in pretty much perfect condition. Magnificent. The Egyptians are a culture I'm always fascinated with. Wow, look at this. It's a giant arm. I think that's a giant arm. It looks like one. But wow. That is incredible. This is particularly interesting. You might find that symbol familiar. That looks very much like the symbol for Ahura Mazda, the creator deity in Zoroastrianism. We also have what looks very similar to an angel, and that makes sense because this is where angels as we know them today originate from, the winged being. And this is Assyrian, this is not Zoroastrian, this predates Zoroastrianism. Or maybe it doesn't, we have no idea when Zoroaster lived. It's between like 500 and 2000 BC. But This is a very common kind of Near Eastern thing, or I guess kind of a Mesopotamian Persian thing, was to have guardian spirits that had both bird and man aspects to them. And as you can see, it looks very much like a modern angel, and that's because this is where angels came from. I'm not sure how angels were represented in pre-captivity Jewish tradition. I'm not sure if they were really represented at all. But as time went on, they eventually adapted things like the hierarchy of angels, etc., from Zoroastrianism, and kind of the depiction of them from the Babylonian captivity. So it's not really strange at all that the Zoroastrians would adopt something from a pagan religion. That doesn't really surprise me at all, because that's fairly common even among monotheistic religions to kind of adopt cultural aspects of what preceded them. Like, Christianity took a lot of Roman culture, a lot of Roman symbolism, etc. Like, from my understanding, the sacrament of confirmation, the bishop used to slap you when he was performing it, which is a reference to a ritual they used to do for Roman soldiers, where they'd smack them to toughen them up because they're becoming soldiers for Christ. And that's not in any way theologically problematic. It's just kind of a cultural thing they adopted. And there isn't really anything idolatrous about having angels as kind of winged beings. It's just kind of something that developed over time. But interesting. Interesting thing about Assyrian religion and its connection to Indo-European religion is that obviously the supreme deity of Assyrian religion, although he's more of a god, the king of the gods, kind of like Zeus, than a creator deity, is Ashur, which sounds a lot like Ahura, as in Ahura Mazda. And that, combined with the similar iconography, makes me think that there probably is a lot of back and forth on that. And it's true because the region saw a lot of mixing of Indo-European and Semitic tradition. Because keep in mind, at this point in time, the Hittites controlled Anatolia, what we call Turkey today, and they were an Indo-European people. Also, there was an Indo-European dynasty that controlled kind of the area of Assyrian Babylon called the Mitanni. And so there was a mixture of Indo-European and Semitic people in the area. Now, the root of Ahura, the root of Ahura is the same as in Hinduism. You have the Asuras, who are evil, power-seeking demons, and Devas are gods. Where in Zoroastrianism you have the Druj, which are their version of the Devas, who are demons, and the Ahura, which means wise lord, or is their name for the ultimate god. So just kind of an interesting thought about how you can have syncretism. Interestingly, the Hittites never became syncretic. They were very, very averse to it, and it was very common to fiercely worship their local god and really tolerate no others. Here with the extremely famous statue of Ramses II. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Egyptian names, because it's really interesting, and it kind of gives a bit of context to the Bible. So the thing you have to keep in mind about Egyptian names is if they end in an "-ese" or an "-osis", it means born of or comes from. So Tutmosis, and generally it's preceded by the name of a god. So Tutmosis means born of Thoth. Ramses means born of Ra, etc. And so Moses means born of. So it is an authentic Egyptian name. Now, for whatever reason, he doesn't have a divine preceding, and I don't know if that was deliberate, if he just dropped it, etc. But it is kind of an interesting thing that was within it. But so, just some thoughts on that. I can't think of another osis off the top of my head, but like I said, any name that ends with that, that's what that means. If you ever notice when you're looking at ancient statues, generally speaking, the noses are gone. That's because, well, for obvious reasons, the nose tends to be long and thin, and so it's very easy to break off compared to the other parts. Like arms are much thicker, ears are kind of part of the statue, so it's very easy for the noses to break off. I don't think it's really deliberate vandalism per se. Now, there is this kind of myth that is kind of a smear against his good name, against Napoleon, that he had his troops shoot off the nose of the Sphinx. Now, the Sphinx's nose had actually been lost a long time ago, just from sandstorms, that sort of thing. Sandstorms can be pretty devastating. If you look at the Sphinx, it's very worn. So that came out a long time ago. Interestingly, Napoleon was the start of Egyptology. Something people, I think, don't really think about when they think about Napoleon was, while he was an amazing general, he was also a scholar. Napoleon loved reading, he loved education, he loved conversing with the most educated people of his time, and when he went to Egypt, he intended to make it part of the French Empire as kind of the basis for their springboard into India and the Middle East. And when he went there, he brought with him a brain trust. He took all the most qualified scholars from the University of Paris, etc., and he just brought them there and he gave them whatever resources they needed in order to go and start researching. So they took all kinds of samples, they got all kinds of papyrus, they did an amazing job just recording information that had been lost for centuries. The French archaeologists were the ones who found the Rosetta Stone, and it and a lot of the artifacts we see here in the museum were given to the British as part of allowing them to withdraw from Egypt and go back to France. However, I think the British allowed them to come here and study them firsthand. So that was fairly magnanimous of them, but that's why the Rosetta Stone is here and not elsewhere. Apparently his Patreon's doing a lot better than I thought, because Sargon apparently has a palace now, and he's managed to afford to commission these 2 winged lions. So, like I said, Patreon's going really well for him. Now, in preparation for coming here, I've been learning cuneiform. So let's see what this says. This here says, by decree of Emperor Sargon, it depends upon the age of the child, really. Okay. Now, in ancient Assyria, there was a thing where they were playing dice, and along came a group of religious reformers, and the religious reformers were trying to get rid of the dice, and so they started to publish these fake stone tablets. The stone tablets would say that these particular dice were possessed by demons, and if you use these dice, then you would undergo a curse. So this thing started called Gamergate, and this tells the story over here of Gamergate, and it was about ethics in dice reporting, and it would eventually become about ethics in video games, but this was before electricity. So that is the origin of Gamergate, and you see that is the god known as Vishur. That's Vishur right there, and he is the brother of Sargon. And yeah, so like I said, Patreon is really working out for him if he was able to afford this in his palace. Apparently his Patreon's doing a lot better than I thought, because he's able to afford a palace, and he was able to afford to commission these huge statues and place them here. So I've been teaching myself to read cuneiform, so we're going to go and read it. So here's some law text issued by Sargon. So this says, it depends upon the child, really. And that's a good thing. That's very important. So if we go over a little bit, we also have some narrative text. So what happened in ancient Assyria was there was they liked to play with knuckle bones and dice, and that was the national pastime. They play games, and people who got really good at gambling were called gamers. So this reform group came around called the Sons of Justice's Wings, in other words, the SJWs, and they came up with these calumnies and lies that if you played these games, you had a curse. A curse would come upon you, etc. And they tended to be unmarried women, or women whose husbands would go out and spend their food budget gambling. So it doesn't really make sense that they were called the Sons of Justice Wings or the SJWs, but it was a misleading tactic. It was a rule for radical to pretend the organization was mainly male in the patriarchal society, but it was really women behind the scenes controlling stuff. So what happened was, and as you can see, wings were a very big thing back in ancient Assyria. So the Sons of Justice's Wings were publishing these stone tablets saying that you get curses, it's degenerate for society to play these games. And then Sargon passed a decree saying, "Thou shalt have ethics in stone stone tablet gaming." Ethics and stone tablets written about gaming. And that is how ethics were restored to stone tablet gaming. And he published this stone tablet about the ethics above the eastern gate of his capital. And so that gate became known as Gamergate. It's a true story. So here we have the god Vishur, and Vishur was the patron deity of Sargon, and he would protect Sargon, and that's how Sargon's empire was able to grow, and that's how he was able to build the Gamergate, was through the protection of the god V. And yeah, so that is true. Now there is a picture over here of a conflict between Sargon and Jimrod. So this is Sargon talking to Jimrod, and Sargon saying, "At least I have a staff, unlike you." And as you can see, Jimrod is very upset by this. And Jimrod says, "Yes, but with your staff, it looks like one of those poles that's used to stir wine. You could just be at some common tavern making wine with that pole." And Sargon was pretty angry about that, and he was laughed at in public. But he was able to defeat Jimrod in the end and build the Akkadian Empire.